Okay, so we're at participation is at 13 right now. I'm going to welcome everybody out today to our Lunch and Learn. We have an exciting presentation with our host here, April Rippel, who's going to discuss safe preservation for food that we've grown in our garden. So, um, April, we'll let you go ahead and go. Let me just make one quick announcement that I do. Uh, Everybody needs to be muted out during this thing and hold your questions to the end. If you have something you think is pertinent to the conversation, there is a conversation button should be on your screen. Um, it's a little text looking box, and you can type your question in there, um, and we'll get to it at the end. So, April, take it away.
Okay, I'm seeing a bad network quality. Can everybody still hear me? What is that me or is that Jerry?
Yeah, no, you're doing good. I'm muting myself out too.
Oh, okay. All right. Here we go. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We will be covering how to safely preserve the food you've grown. And I was talking to Mary Stibler just the other day, and it's not necessarily the food you've grown. If you get a bounty from a farmer's market or see a really good deal at your supermarket, you can buy a bunch of stuff and do something with it, and that way you know exactly what you're eating when you preserve your own things. So, oops, why is it not forwarding? Oh, here we go. All right, so why grow and preserve your own food? Well, I thought this was kind of funny. It was on Facebook the other day. So if your food can go bad, it's good for you, right? If your food can't go bad, it's not good for you. That's all your packaged processed things. But you know, nowadays we have to buy some processed things. We don't all have all the time in the world to cook everything from scratch every single time, every single meal. So it's convenient to have some of those processed foods. And unfortunately, they put a lot of things in them nowadays that you might not want to put in your body. So if you preserve your own food from scratch, you have the convenience of opening it up right away and you know what's in it. And besides, it's very rewarding. You know, you get a little exercise, you can take pride in either what you've grown and preserved or just preserved yourself. And you'll know it's fresh, you'll know exactly what's in it. And after all, you are what you eat, right? So, the reason I like to do it is because I know exactly what's going in our bodies, my family's body, and I'm very particular about that. You don't want to go to the grocery store with me. It takes me forever to go through the grocery store because I usually read all the ingredients every single time. It gets a little monotonous, but I know when they've changed an ingredient, it's something I don't want to eat anymore. So whether you have a lot of room or just a tiny bit of room, we live in a suburb, so I don't have a whole lot of growing room, but you put some raised beds in and you can get quite a bounty of stuff sometimes. I like most master gardeners, probably plant a lot more than I need and end up with a lot more things than I thought I was going to have. I should have planted one plant and I planted five, and then I have all this eggplant with you can't eat it all that quickly, so you need something to do with it. And of course, if you have a lot of space, you can end up like some people like Jerry with tons and tons of stuff, and you need a way to either sell it or give it away or preserve it to have all throughout the year. So you have this bounty of whatever you're growing. What do you do with it? And a lot of people think of canning, but we're going to find out there's a whole lot of ways you can preserve things. So some of the things we're going to go through today are the methods of preserving, how to choose the correct method for what you want to preserve, safety, bacteria, viruses, yeast, things we all know about right now from this year, and a close-up look at a few of these methods, and then we're going to get into canning in a little more detail because that's what most people like to find out about is canning. That seems to be the popular way to preserve nowadays. So, like I'm saying, there's many ways, a lot more ways than you maybe think of to preserve. There's pickling, fermenting, dry salting, kind of an old-timey thing, cellaring. I'm sure most of you do cellaring, whether you know it or not. Freeze drying, sealing, freezing, dehydrating, and canning. There may be other ways too, I'm not sure. Okay, so what you need to look at when you're choosing a method is safety first. What methods are safe, which are unsafe. There's some expensive ways to preserve. There's some very inexpensive ways. How labor intensive is it? How long will it be good for? Some ways only keep for a few days, and some ways may keep for years and years. Just some things to keep in mind. But whatever method you choose, you've got to keep sanitation in the top of your mind. You must sanitize your prep area. You need to wash all your containers and sanitize them. You need to wash your hands. If you do anything, wash your hands. If you touch anything, if you breathe, wash your hands. That's something we should all be very familiar with this year. And I'm going to take a little bit of time and look at why. Why are we washing our hands so much? Well, of course, all these things, right? Germs, bacteria, pathogens, viruses, all kinds of things. So in order to save time today, we're just going to call all these things, we're going to group them together and call them cooties. We're trying to get rid of the cooties. You don't want to touch the cooties. If you touch the cooties, you want to get rid of the cooties. We all know about cooties, right? So in a little bit closer look at some of these things, we all think of things as germs, but they're really not. In fact, a virus is not a germ. Who would have thought, right? A virus is not even a living organism. They're an infective agent, and they can actually infect a bacteria, a germ. They're so tiny, teeny tiny, that they can actually infect things. And we think of viruses as being bad, but they're not all bad. In my research, I came across this one article. I think we're past lunchtime, so I can go ahead and talk about this. They did a study. I love studies. And this caught my eye. I thought it was kind of funny. They took the poop from a newborn baby, and they looked under a microscope, and they found absolutely no viruses in that poop at all. Nothing. Clean as a newborn baby, right? And so they let the mom take the baby and do whatever moms do with newborn babies that first week, and they brought the baby back in after a week and looked at its poop again, and it contained about 100 million virus particles in 1 week. Now we need some of those to survive, just like we need a certain flora of bacteria in our gut to have a good digestive and immune system. So I just thought this was very interesting. So we have viruses in our system our whole lifetime. From 1 week on, we've got viruses in our system. Some are good, some are bad, some we form a defense against, some we don't need to. We actually need the viruses and bacteria to survive. So I'm going to let you have a closer look at some of the bad guys, because we're talking about bacteria and viruses and all those things a lot in the news lately, it seems like. Under a microscope, this is E. coli. I know you've all heard about it in the news, food, whatever, people get sick from it. And this is what they look like. I thought that was really interesting, kind of like little hairy worms. So that's your E. coli. Salmonella, we've heard about that a lot lately. I think, isn't that the one getting on lettuce, or is it Listeria? Anyway, it's getting on our lettuce. You have to wash things or maybe throw it out. And this is what it looks like, again, under a microscope. Kind of weird looking. Listeria, we've all heard of that. This is what it looks like. Yeah, it's interesting how they kind of all look like little worms. Something out of a sci-fi movie, right? Fungus. Here in Texas, we're all familiar with fungus, molds, all that good stuff. When it's warm and moist, we're going to get this stuff. Just have to be aware, some fungus is good, some is not so good. And here's the bad guy this year. This is the one. I know you've all seen the animation of it in the news. This is what the bad guy really looks like. This is the COVID-19. Now this is very much magnified. These guys are so teeny-tiny, it has to be super, super magnifying to see them. They're so tiny, and that's why it's spreading so quickly, which is a shame. But now, when you're washing your hands, you can think of these bad guys and really scrub, and that 20 seconds is going to go by so fast because you're going to imagine all these bad guys on your hands or whatever you're washing, and it's going to make washing your hands that 30 million times a day go by a little bit better. Okay, we've looked at some of the bad guys. So now we're going to look at some of the good guys. We do need some of these to actually make our food, well, to preserve it and to make it taste good. We all know about yeast. There's some bacteria we need. There's some molds that we need. And we're going to look at how enzymes affect some of our food. All right, yeast. Everybody knows about yeast, right? We need it for our bread to make it taste really good. It causes fermentation, and it happens through the work of these tiny little organisms called yeast. Bacteria, along with bacteria and mold, they put out a gas. They create an enzyme that puts out a gas that breaks down into chemicals, and that gas is what makes your bread rise. And this is a lovely bread that was baked by Valerie, and she shared it on Facebook, and I couldn't resist. She's making all of us hungry on Facebook for her breads because she's making so many of them. But it actually the yeast breaks down the sugars, and that's what makes your dough rise and makes wonderful tasting bread. So we like some yeast. There's some bad yeast too, but this is a good one. Bacteria. We can use bacteria in things like sauerkraut. What happens in sauerkraut and things that we ferment is the good bacteria is encouraged in order to inhibit the growth of the bad bacteria. So it's kind of like in your gut. In your system, you want good bacteria to wipe out the bad bacteria, and that's going to help with your digestion. In foods like sauerkraut and yogurt, that good bacteria helps to get rid of the bad bacteria and creates the wonderful tasting foods that we like. When you're freezing, you want to blanch things because it actually kills some of the enzymes in the food. And what that does is it helps when you're thawing the food to make it a little bit better, less mushy. If you freeze it without blanching, it's going to be a little bit mushy and broken down more than if you blanched it first. So that's the case where we're trying to get rid of an enzyme. When you're canning, heat and time is what kills the bacteria, the bad bacteria. And then of course your jars are vacuum sealed, and that helps to inhibit the formation of the bad bacteria in the future so that you can keep it for a number of months or years. Cheese is another example. This is where we're using mold. You wouldn't normally think of mold as being good on things, but in some cheeses you need it to develop the flavor and help it to get ready to eat. Your brie, your blue cheeses, that mold's going to help it. And of course, if you leave food out too long without keeping it cold, enzymes quickly grow, and that creates the spoilage that you're going to get. So you don't want to leave things out more than 30 minutes. I know in the old days we used to leave Thanksgiving dinner out for hours and hours and hours, and we'd go back and munch on it all afternoon. How did we ever survive? I don't know. But you really should put things up after about 30 minutes. Okay, so choosing your preservation method. So we have all these different foods. We have high acid, we have low acid, we have fruit, we have vegetables. Some of you might have meats, fish. There are ways of preserving these things, but you need to decide which is best. So we're going to go through some of the methods of preserving and look at them and maybe help you decide which ones you want to try and maybe experiment. A lot of us have a lot of time on our hands these days, so you might want to try experimenting with some of these. Pickling. I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with pickling. However, if you pickle foods without combining it with something like canning or refrigeration, it can go bad fairly quickly. So just be prepared to make a combination. But it is good for a lot of foods, including fruits, vegetables, meats, seafood, even eggs. It's fairly easy, it's inexpensive. And if you combine it with another method, it's good for 5 to 6 months. Fermenting. We talked about fermenting a little bit. You just need to really pay attention to detail when you're experimenting with fermenting. You don't need any special equipment. It's easy. When you do it correctly and sanitarily, it's good for 5 to 6 months. Again, it's good for many food types, including fruits, vegetables, meats, seafoods, a wide range of things, even wines, sauerkraut. That's all your cured meats. That's all your things you want to try fermenting. And of course, there's YouTubes nowadays. You can get really in-depth classes, training online on how to do these things. I'm just kind of leaving you the options to try. Dry salting, that's kind of a old-fashioned way of preserving things back before they had refrigeration and all our good things we have nowadays. It's a little tricky, but a lot of people think that vegetables are tastier when they use this method to preserve them. There's no special equipment that's needed. It's easy, and it's good for about 4 months. Of course, like with any of the other methods, if the color is off or it smells funny, toss it. Do not take a chance. But again, since you have a little extra time these days, it might be something you'd want to play with. Just another method that a lot of people don't usually think of. Curing. Now, you have heard of curing probably, especially with hams and certain meats. Curing uses nitrates to help preserve it. It's a complex drying process, and you must have special equipment to do this. So it's not real popular for home preserving, but it does keep your foods good for weeks up to years, depending on the method you use. Again, just something to think about. If you're into meats and things like that, you might want to try it. Cellaring. This is my cellar. Most of us here in Texas don't have a basement or a regular cellar, so you need another place to do your cellaring. This is where you'd want to put your onions, your garlic that you've dried a little bit. These are all my onions that I didn't plant last year. They all came up volunteer. I must have let some seeds go last year that I didn't see, and I had all kinds of onions and garlic coming up this year. So I dried it out a little bit, and then I put it in bags. That's not grapefruit. That's a grapefruit bag that I got from the grocery store, and after we ate the grapefruit, I saved the bag, and that's what I put my onions in. So this is all hanging in my closet, and that's where I do my cellaring. Any room that's cool, dark, fairly dry will work as your cellar here in Texas, because I don't know of anybody with a cellar. So, but you can keep your onions and all those good things for weeks to months. These onions are from last spring, and they're still perfectly good. Good way to save on some money. If you get a good deal, just hang them up in the closet. All right, freeze drying. This is probably the best method for preserving food. However, it's not in most of our budgets. I know it's not in mine. It's very easy, but it's very expensive. The machine to do your freeze drying runs $2,000 to $3,000 for your basic machine. However, your food would last 10 to 30 years. So I would say if I were a younger person and I had the money, it might be something you'd want to invest in. At my age, I don't really think I'll be wanting food 30 years from now that I preserve today. You never know nowadays. But for a younger person, that might be kind of a good thing to do. And when you freeze dry, you can do many more things. You can do dairy products, which you normally wouldn't be able to do to preserve, and complete meals. If you want to do a complete meal and pull it out at a later time, this is your way to go. But not real practical for just anybody on a regular budget. All right, sealing, good old seal-a-meal. My first sealing machine was given to me by my brother-in-law, and I fell in love with it. It's so easy. It's fairly inexpensive. We actually ended up buying another sealing machine that's a little bit bigger and a little more complex. But with sealing, you're good for a few days, up to a year if you put it in a home freezer. Some things, if you've dried them, if you dehydrated or dried them, you can seal them up and store them on a shelf. So it's very practical, easy to do, quick. If I don't have any other way of preserving and I need to preserve something very quickly, some big batch of carrots or something that I was given, I'll blanch them, put them in the sealer and freeze it, and they're good for quite a while. So inexpensive machines don't cost that much. You can get small ones at a fairly good price. And it's just an easy way of preserving some of your foods. Freezing. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about freezing. The freezer in your home refrigerator is not going to give you true freezing. It just doesn't get cold enough. We open it up too much. We open to put things in. We open it to take things out. It's not a true freezer. So It's going to be relatively expensive if you want to do some true freezing. You'd have to buy a separate freestanding freezer. I would love to do that, but again, it's a little pricey. And it would need to keep it below 0. So that's pretty cold, and you wouldn't be opening it very often. You'd have to be very organized and get in there and pull out what you want real quickly and close it up. So practically speaking, a home freezer, when you freeze things, you want to only keep it in there maybe 8 to 12 months. So very important to label things, even things you've bought from the store that are frozen. If you're not going to use it right away, you need to label it and pull it out before that year comes up. If things get freezer burn, I know it doesn't look very good. You could actually eat it, but it's not going to be very appetizing. So if you go past that 12 months in a home freezer, you're going to start getting freezer burn. You're going to start getting, it's going to start drying out. It's going to get the little crystals and not very appetizing. But it is an option. It's quick, it's easy, and for short term, it's a good option. All right, drying and dehydrating. This is a fun method to preserve foods. It's relatively inexpensive and easy. Some things, if you combine it with another method like sealing, it'll last for years. You can do some really fun things, like if you have a big, huge fig tree and you're figged out and you've made all the fig preserves that you can handle. We found I was given a really nice recipe by a friend. You soak the figs, you nip off the top, soak the figs overnight in orange juice, put them in a dehydrator for about 12 hours or so, and it makes this delicious candy-like little morsel thing that they're a little bit chewy and they're sweet and they're so good. Other things you can use that dehydrator for, you can use it for just about anything, fruits, vegetables, meats. I had a big bounty of eggplant. That's what's in the bag right there a few years ago. And what I did is I dehydrated it and then I sealed it. And then I used the eggplant for dishes, for recipes. I'd take a bag out, crumble it up, and put it in my spaghetti sauce and lasagna, things like that. So, and it's good for maybe 6 months to a year if you combine it. Kind of a fun, inexpensive way to preserve your foods. And the biggie, canning. This is what everybody's interested in, right? So we're going to go a little more in depth on the canning, but specifically it's a method where you're using heat and time to vacuum seal your food in a jar. That's basically it. Takes a little bit of practice, a little bit of expense to set up with the equipment, but with canning you get to use things over and over, so it's fairly practical. If you have a lot of things that you'd want to can, it is practical to do, and once you've done it once or twice, you're a pro. It's not that big of a deal. So we're going to go into it, and it's good for about a year. You need to label your things good for about a year. All right, pros and cons of canning. It's great for extending the enjoyment of your homegrown produce or meats if you're a meat eater. You can make your own recipes. You can add your own spices. You can, in our case, my husband can't have salt, so I don't add salt to our things, so he can have salt-free veggies and beans and all those good things. So you can control your ingredients. There's no added preservatives. And you can control your portion size. You may want to put some things in a small jar if you live alone, or in a quart-sized jar if you have a bigger family. And hey, it makes great gifts at Christmas. I love getting home canned things. I know it goes into it time and labor-wise, so I enjoy getting those homegrown canned goodies. Cons, all right. You've got to sanitize. Bacteria is your enemy, so you have to take a little bit of time with prepping, sanitizing, your temperature control. It is a little time consuming. You have the initial cost of getting your canning tools and your instruments, little time and labor intensive. You need a place to store your goods. We actually put up, my cellar where I had my onions, we actually put up shelves in there, and that's where my canned goods go. That's them on the right. And you need to be able to label them so that you have a time label on them, and you need to be able to rotate your jars so that you're eating the thing that you did the latest first and keeping control of that time. Like I said, they're good for about a year, but I love having that convenience. All right, some of the things you need to do, you can reuse your jars and the rims. The rims are the part of the lid that screws down. You just need to inspect the glass every time to make sure there's no chips or cracks. You need to look at your rims every time and make sure there's no rusts or dents in them. That will make a difference in your sealing. So you need to make sure if you're not going to buy them new, that they're in really good shape. The lids, the flat disc thing that goes down first and then you screw it down with the rim, the lid must be bought new every time, but they're relatively inexpensive. All right, it's not a time to be a mad scientist. You can experiment with the recipes, but nothing else. Not the processing times, not the items to be canned, and not with undocumented canning methods. You just don't want to mess around with that. A few years ago, I read somewhere that you should put olive oil on the rim of the glass before you put the lid down and screw it down to do the canning. No, nothing should go in between that clean, wiped off glass surface and your lid. So you might read things like that. No, don't be tempted. Now, stick with the tried and true. You don't want to get sick from something that you preserved. All right, there's two types of canning. We have the water bath, fairly easy, and the pressure canning. With water bath canning, you want to use your high acid foods. So that's why it's good for your jams and jellies and fruits and salsas, any kind of tomato type things, your pickles, anything with your vinegars and condiments. Water bath is great. It's really easy to do, not very time consuming. You don't have to watch it quite as closely. So it's an easy place to start. You're going to need pretty much the same tools. But if you're thinking about canning and have never done it before, I would start with a water bath canning of something and try it and see if you even like it. And then move on to getting into the pressure canning. Pressure cooking you want for your low acid foods, that's most of your vegetables, things like chili recipes, your meat, seafood, poultry. It gets a little more expensive, but it's very rewarding. All right, we're going to go into depth a little bit on water canning, and then we'll move on to the pressure. It's ideal for high acid foods. You do it at a lower temperature. So you can do your water bath canning on your stovetop. Even if you have a glass top stove, you can do your water bath canning in your kitchen. So it makes it really easy. You just need to bring it up to a boil. It's not that big of a deal. It creates the vacuum very easily with the high acid foods. So again, easy, good place to start. Just need it hot enough, that boiling, to destroy any molds, yeast, and enzymes. Pressure canning. This is for your low acid foods, and it takes a very high temperature to create that vacuum. It takes time and temperature to destroy the bacteria, to get that vacuum in these types of foods. It is a little more expensive, but like I said, if you try the water bath first, you can use practically all the same tools to do your pressure canning. You just have to buy a pressure cooker. So what you'll need in comparison, water bath, you just need a big deep pot. Pressure cooker, you need the pressure cooker. After that, the glass canning jars, a good jar lifter, we're going to look at that in a minute, a funnel, some wooden tools, and of course your fresh quality ingredients that you're going to put in it. Things that you'll need in that top left picture, you'll see the funnel, the glass jar, a big nice scoop is always nice, a little grabber, big pot. These tamale pots work just fine. The lifter, the jar lifter on the right bottom, those are, I'd say that's almost a must for either method. Those jars get hot in that water, and it's easy to lift them out with that jar lifter and to lower them in when you're putting it in. All right, for a water bath. The pot you want to get, you don't want an aluminum pot. You want a non-reactive type metal. You don't want something that's old. On those tamale pots, that enamel, you want to make sure it's not cracked or rusted anywhere. One of those big tamale pots, H-E-B has them all the time. You can pick one up for 10 to 30 bucks. Not that big of a deal. You can get some very expensive pots. You can spend $300–400 if you want to. I don't think you really need to do that. Copper is tricky. It's expensive and tricky. I don't know if you'd really want to mess with copper pots. My besides my tamale pot, is the pot I use is a stainless steel pot. Mine is very old. It was inherited from my mother-in-law, bless her heart, rest her soul. I love that pot. It's probably 40 years old. It's got a lid. It's wonderful. And if you went to go buy one, a good one, you'd want to wait like 1810, a triple ply, a tri-ply, and it's going to cost you $65 to $200. Good investment. It's going to last you for years. You get what you pay for, right? In the pressure cookers, there are a lot of brands to choose from. I'm not going to recommend one over another, but you're going to at least want to spend around $200 for a pressure cooker. It's going to decide, it's going to be what size do you want, what type do you want. A lot of things to consider when you're buying a pressure cooker. It's a pretty big investment and something you're going to want to use over and over and over. So it's worth delving into to research a little bit, but I'm going to give you some hints. 3 types generally of pressure cookers. The first generation, maybe some of you, if you're a little bit older, had one of these. It used a weight modified valve. Usually there was a gasket that had to go in between the lid and the pot itself. You don't see very many of these around anymore, but they are around. They're a perfectly good pressure cooker. It'd take a little more watching. I remember Mom, I think, blowing the rock off the top of one time, scared the heck out of us. What you're mostly going to see nowadays is the second generation. And this is using a spring-loaded valve and usually has a gauge on top to look at actually watching where your pressure is at. These are standard nowadays. Anything you buy nowadays is going to be the second generation. There's also what is being called a third generation, and this is your electric pressure cookers. They're a little bit small. They'd be ideal for a single person or somebody that just wanted to can a few little things, smaller things. They don't hold very many jars at a time. They're wonderful in that you don't have to watch them. You pretty much set it and it does everything else for you. Time, watches the pressure. It's pretty handy, but it's just not for somebody who's going to do a lot of canning. Let me put it that way. But it'd be great, like I said, for a single person. I think it'd be wonderful. And a lot of them do more than one thing. They're multi-purpose. They do searing and steaming. You could cook your rice in it. You can do other things with it, with the electric. The single-purpose pressure cookers, that's pretty much all they do. I mean, you could boil water. I guess you could do your water bath in the, well, not really, because you need to put a lid on it. So they're kind of pretty much one thing only on your single-purpose. But if you do a lot of canning, they're great because they do hold a lot of jars. You just need to find out what your strength is because they are very heavy. All right. Heat sources for your pressure cooker. Like I said, I'm going to take a little sip of tea here. Losing my voice. Too many years of teaching exercise classes. My vocal cords aren't there anymore. All right. On a glass top stove, you can do your water bath just fine. You cannot use a pressure cooker on a glass top stove. The reason being is pressure cookers have a slightly concave bottom, so it never gets that really good contact with the glass top, and it will never come up and stay at pressure. So if you're like me and have a glass top, I love my glass top, but I can't pressure cook on it. What I did is I went out and bought a burner, and these burners, you can get them all over the place, hunting stores, on the internet. They cost maybe $60 to $100. My first one I got for $10 at a yard sale. I think it was the Master Gardener yard sale a few years ago. And I kind of outgrew it, and I got this other one. Great for controlling your heat. You can bring your water up and your pressure up slowly. You can control it. Anybody who cooks with gas knows what I'm talking about. It's great for heat control. Well worth the investment. I've had mine for several years now. That's what you'll need to do. I'd say even if you have any kind of electric stove. I don't think electric stove gives you that even heat like gas does. So if you have an electric, or especially a glass top, you'd need to get one of these or something where you could have control of your heat for your pressure cooking. Like I said, water bath is fine. You can cook it in your kitchen. The other great thing about doing it outside on the porch or whatever is you keep the heat out of the kitchen, which is very important here in Texas sometimes, like right now. All right, so before canning for your first time, especially pressure cooking, I would take a class, honestly, or at least look at a YouTube, look at something online, or have a friend with you. Nowadays that's kind of hard unless they're in your little circle of safe people. But well, at least watch a how-to on YouTube or something, because you don't want to be in the middle of canning and have a question and go, I gotta go look this up. You need to work kind of quickly when you're canning. Things are hot, you want to keep them hot, you want to keep things moving. You don't want to expose your food to air any more than you have to once you cut it up, that sort of thing. So you want to keep things moving. So you kind of want to at least have an idea of what you're doing before you get started. All right, we're going to run through quickly basic water bath steps and then pressure steps. I think we have enough time to go through those. So water bath, basically you'll need 2 pots, one for keeping your jars hot in hot water after they're sanitized, and one for the actual cooking. So in a separate pot, you have your jars, you prepare your food, you get the water boiling. This is where your funnel comes in handy. You need to leave a little bit of head space in jars, and that actually has the measurements so you can see where an inch is, half inch, whatever your cooking, canning, whatever headspace it needs. It's an easy measurement, easy way to do it. So you have all your water going, your jars prepped, you put your food item in the jar, you put the lid on it, you screw down the band, and then you use that jar lifter to lift it into your pot for the processing. You want to make sure there's at least 1 to 2 inches of water above the top of the jar for water bath. After it gets boiling, you start your processing time, you put a lid on it. After your time is up, you take the lid off and you let it set for 5 more minutes. Now this PowerPoint will be on my website, so you don't need to rapidly take notes or take pictures if you don't want to. You can go and look at the PowerPoint at your leisure. Is it already on my website? It's already on there, so we'll give you that website at the end. So we'll run through this quickly. You remove your jars with your lifter. Try not to jostle them. You should start hearing a popping sound. That's your lid. There's a little bubble in your lid, and when it vacuum seals, that bubble pops down, and you shouldn't be able to move it. Don't touch them for 12 to 24 hours. At the end of that, you can wipe them clean. Push that little bubble thing in the middle, make sure it doesn't flex. It should be sealed down tight. I remove the lid, the rim, and then I test the lid like with a fingernail under it, make sure it doesn't pop off easily. Label your jars and put them in a nice, cool, dark place for storage. Start using them. Good stuff. All right, basic pressure canning steps. And again, this will be on the website. When you get your pressure cooker, read the manual front to back. You need to read and know your pressure cooker. They're all a little bit different. So you need to read, even if you've had one before and you get a new one, you need to look and see what your new one will want. You have a rack that goes in the bottom. You put about 3 inches of water in it. You go through the kind of the same steps we just went through. You have your jars in a separate pot. You have them hot. You take them out, you dump out the water, you put your stuff in them, whatever you're cooking. You put the lid, you wipe the rim, you put the lid on it, you screw down the rim on it. And then what I do is I put it back in the hot water to keep it hot until I take it out to my pressure cooker, because I have to go from the kitchen out to the back porch. So that's the way I do it. But your jars are pretty much prepared the same way. Once you've got them all done, you put them in your slightly boiling water. Have your water to boil in that bottom part of the pressure cooker. Once you have it at a rolling boil and you have all your jars in, you're going to put the lid on it. And within a couple minutes, it should start venting. There's a little valve. If you look at that picture on the left, you can kind of see that little spout sticking up. That's your vent. Steam will start coming out of that fairly quickly. Put a timer on. It usually takes about 7 to 10 minutes, according to your cooker, to vent it. And then you'll put that rock on it. And that's the thing on the right, that round, heavy thing. You'll put it to the correct pressure Most of the things that I can are done at 10 pounds. So you see the little tin, you'll put that down over the little spout thing, and then you wait for that first jiggle. Now my pressure cooker has a gauge on it. I think you can see it in the next slide. Yeah, that gauge on the right. So I can kind of watch it go up to the 10 pounds or whatever pounds I'm cooking at. So you'll know when it's fixing to jiggle. Once you get that little jiggle on the rock, you start your timer for your processing time. Your jiggle should come about 1 to 3 times a minute. If it's jiggling more than that, you're really just wasting fuel. You're cooking it too hot. You turn it down to that 1 to 3 jiggle a minute. If you're not jiggling at all, you drop down in pressure. If you lose pressure and you drop below what you're supposed to be, you need to start that processing time all over again. So you want to be sure and have the heat evenly kept out so that you can keep that pressure up during your whole pressure time. You're squeaky, honey. You got a squeaky chair. Okay. All right, once we're done with the processing time, you're just going to let it set, turn your heat off, let it set. And again, when you have this little gauge, it's kind of neat because you can watch the pressure dropping down. If you don't have it, you're just going to have to test it. Usually you need to wait at least 20 to 30 minutes for the pressure to come back down. If you don't have the gauge, I take a fork and kind of stick it in that rock and lift it. If you hear steam coming out, if you still have pressure, drop it back down and wait a little bit longer until that pressure comes down to 0. And then you can safely take the rock off and take the lid off. If you take it off too soon and steam goes out, you lose a lot of steam right away. What's going to happen is it tends to suck a lot of the moisture out of your jars. So you're going to lose a lot of the liquid out of your jars, and you don't really want that. Use your jar lifter to lift the jars out and place them again in a cool, dark place for 12 to 24 hours. Go through the same process of taking the rims off, check your lid to make sure they seal correctly, press that little bubble in the middle, mark them what it is and the date. All right. This little tool, I didn't have it earlier, it's a neat little tool for getting the lids off when you're ready to use your goodies. It's got a little thing on the end that you prop it up with. That kind of 2-part thing is for getting the bands off. It easily turns those little bands and get them off. So it's just, you don't have to have this tool, it's just kind of a neat one. All right, I think at this time, good, we have a few minutes for questions. So how do you get from the greens to storing them and having all those goodies? So Jerry, do we have any questions? Or do we want to open it up for a chat?
We can open it up.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Okay.
In our club, we had a lot of peppers. We always have a lot of peppers because of our plant sales.
Sure.
And so I had wanted to make like a cowboy candy with my peppers, which is, kind of a pickle with some sugar and stuff in there. But in order to collect all the peppers, I was told I was putting them in the freezer, and then I was going to pull them out of the freezer and do the pickling on them. But I was told I couldn't do that and it wouldn't work.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do that. Maybe you could refrigerate them, because to freeze them, you'd really want to blanch them first, and I think that would take away. You'd want them kind of crispy for pickling, right?
Yep.
So if you didn't have to wait too long in between your harvesting, I would just refrigerate them. They keep fairly well in the refrigerator. Excuse me.
Because it was kind of a catch, because you don't want to, the more peppers you pick, the more grow.
Yeah.
But so I don't want to keep them all on the plant until I have enough to go, because my production will be more limited. So I was trying to find something to do with them until I was ready to pickle them.
Yeah. Maybe either do smaller batches of the pickling, or you could try refrigerating them. I kind of did the same thing. I had a lot of peppers the last couple of weeks, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with them. We ended up having them on shish kebabs last night, actually. But I kept them in the refrigerator. They keep really well, just like any pepper in the refrigerator. I probably had them in there a couple of weeks. I don't know how long you'd want to wait for your harvest or how quickly they're growing. But yeah, if you're wanting to do a big batch, that does get tricky. But
Yeah.
yeah, freezing, yeah, you wouldn't want to do that. Like I said, you'd have to blanch them to kill the enzyme so that they don't get mushy when you thaw them out.
Yeah.
And that kind of takes away from that nice crisp crispness that you usually like when you're pickling things. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Well, if anybody else has a question, you can go ahead and click your unmute button on your microphone and present that question for April.
and there is the website on the bottom of that page. If you want to go and view the PowerPoint and get some of the references and go through it on how to do the canning, you can look at the, oh, looks like we have a question. Excuse me, I got to look over here. All right. I have a first generation pressure cooker and was wondering if there's a way I could test it to see if it still works. Usually with first generations, you'd want to inspect it to make sure it's not warped. If it had any kind of gasket, I know my mom's had a gasket and we could not find the replacement gasket. So you might want to do a little research and see if that pressure cooker originally came with a gasket. If the company is still in business, you might want to contact them because most of the pressure cookers back then had that gasket. You want to inspect your rock and make sure it's not cracked or warped. And the other thing you might want to even send it off to a company to have it checked because you'd need to check and make sure the valve isn't leaking at all. That would be your biggest things to look at. So if it was stored very nicely in a dark, cool place, chances are it's probably perfectly good for using. You could probably use it. Just check it out real good. Anything else?
Hey, April, this is Sandy. I don't know if you can hear me.
Hi, I can. Hi, Sandy.
Hi. I remember someone once saying about using like a paraffin seal. Does that sound familiar? Is that something that's used or not used, or am I dreaming?
That is another method. Sealing is a method with a lot of people use it for jams and jellies. I actually use it more of an oil sealer with pesto sauces. It doesn't keep for real long. You'd want to keep it in the refrigerator if you use that sealing method. So you couldn't keep it, long term. I wouldn't keep it more than a couple of months that way because wax can crack and if you get any kind of opening in it, then that opens it up for bacteria. But it's an old-fashioned way of sealing things. Like I said, I use it with my pesto sauces. I'll make a pesto, and since my pesto has Parmesan in it, a cheese, I can't really preserve it any other way other than using a seal on top. So I put a little bit of olive oil on top and then I refrigerate it. And of course the oil gets real hard and that seals it. So it's good for a couple months like that. The other thing I do with it, speaking of pesto, is you can actually freeze it because of the oil. What I do is I put it in ice cube trays and it kind of freezes into cube shapes, and then you can pop those out, put them in a baggie or a sealer, and then use them in sauces and stuff. So it's kind of self-sealing in the oil because you have all the oil in the basil. But you can actually, yes, you can use a wax to seal it, just maybe combine it with refrigeration.
Okay, so you wouldn't necessarily, if you're using the water bath method, then you don't need that seal, then that paraffin seal.
You really don't. Not with the equipment they have nowadays. The lids, they seal really well. But I know people that do it. They try it. I guess they're just experimenting and with the water bath and the good seal on the lid, you could store it outside the refrigerator. With the wax, I would store it in a refrigerator.
Ah, okay,
Yeah.
great. And then one other quick thing. So when you're talking about that third generation electric, are you talking about something like the Instant Pot stuff or that type of configuration?
Yes, they're usually multitask. They do sell some electric pressure cookers that are just a pressure cooker, but because of the way they're made, they can easily be used for other things. So they're very practical. They're just kind of small.
Right.
I think the biggest one I've seen holds maybe 4 quart jars. So for me, it's not practical. I do a lot of canning. That would take me forever to do batch of canning. But very convenient because like I said, you just program it and walk away. It watches the temperature for you. It watches, you'd never lose your pressure. It watches your time and has a timer that goes off and turns itself off. So very practical. But for a single person or maybe a very small family that did a little bit of canning, I think they'd be great. And plus, you'd only have one appliance that would do several things like the pressure cooking, making rice. It's kind of like you can use them as a slow cooker, like you would a crock pot. So very practical in that sense.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sure, sure. Anybody else? There's no stupid questions. Don't be afraid to ask. The first time I did a canning, I was scared to death. I had a friend on speakerphone. She lives in Smithville, and I knew she did a lot of canning. So I called her up. I had her on speakerphone, and she virtually held my hand through it. This is several years ago. And because it's a little nerve-wracking the first time because you're so scared of you want to disinfect everything and keep everything sanitized, and you want to work quickly, and you don't want to forget a step. And so it helps to have, somebody looking over your shoulder, or like I said, at least take a class or something. The AgriLife Extension Office a lot of times gives classes. I haven't seen one in a couple of years, so they're probably, when we can all get back together again, we're probably about due to have one. And that, you can't beat hands-on. There's just nothing more than either doing it yourself or being right there when someone is doing it. That's the best way to do it. But don't be afraid of it, especially the water bath. It's not that difficult. It's a lot of fun.
Yep.
Anybody else?
I've tried prickly pear jelly quite a few times.
Oh yeah.
And it always seems the recipes that I find, when I use the amount of pectin that's recommended, it always ends up more soupy.
Oh.
And I've had to double the pectin. Is that something that you've heard about, or?
And that's the only one you've tried, is the prickly pear?
I've done some other ones, but the prickly pear is the one that ends up being that way for me.
Yeah, there might be too much moisture in the prickly pear. I'm not a big jelly maker, so somebody who is Carol Sakan. I'd maybe give Carol a call and pick her brain on that, because she is the jelly queen.
It still works as an ice cream topping, but
but
not so much as
not
so much as a jelly.
Right. Yeah. You wanted a little more solid. Yeah.
Hi, this is Beth. I have a question as well. Sure. Kind of like Jerry, I have been trying to do the peppers, but making them sweet and still say crisp, like a jalapenos.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, is there a way? Even like pickles, it seems like they never keep their crispness. Is there a certain process to do, or by the time you actually cook something in boiling water, it's not crispy?
Yeah, the Frank my husband's doing a limpy hand. It is.
Or is there a refrigerator? I see refrigerated methods of canning, but it seems like if you're just putting something in the refrigerator, it doesn't really seem canned.
You'd have to keep it in the refrigerator, and it would only be good for a couple of months. That would definitely keep it crisper, though. And pickling, it's really tricky. You have to work really fast. You have to bring it up to a boil as quickly as you can, process it as quickly as you can, and cool it down as quickly as you can. And still stay within the recommended, ways of doing it. So it is tricky. We don't have the equipment like a big manufacturer would that's getting those really crisp pickles. The other thing is the type of pickles. There's all different kinds of cucumbers, right?
Right.
And certainly the picklers are going to give you your crisper pickles. If you just try to do it with regular cucumbers, they're going to be good, but they're not going to be quite as crisp,
Okay, well, I'll give both of those a try.
And it's just a matter of working as quickly as you can when you're handling it. Because
at least I know we have a lot of resources out there, people we can call.
That's right, absolutely. But
they have that crunchy stuff you can add to your pickles at HEB.
Oh, do they? Uh-huh.
Yeah, I wonder if you can add that to jalapenos.
Crunchy stuff?
Might give it a try. I don't see why not.
Where do you find crunchy stuff? Is it on the canning aisle?
On the canning aisle. It's something to help make your pickles more crisp.
Okay, that's a good one to try.
Interesting, yeah. I would try it. You can't, what the heck, right?
Yeah, I saw something at Tractor Supply for like a package of something for adding to pickling. I haven't gotten there yet to try. I mean, to try making it yet, but
Yeah,
we'll see.
seasoning. Yeah, there's seasonings you can add. They have the packets where you don't have to do your individual seasonings. Like usually you'd put in dill and some kosher salt and some mustard seed, and they have the
That might be
packets
what
that
it
you just
is.
add. It makes it convenient.
Well, I'll experiment and let you all know.
We'd appreciate that. We always like to see that. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
sure.
Is there any more questions? We're coming up on time here. We had a total of 21 people join us today,
Well, thank you for joining us, everybody.
and I think we had an awesome presentation.
Great.
We have another Lunch and Learn planned for this month. We've actually got 2 planned for this month. The second one is going to be on August 26th, and we'll have invites go out a couple days before that. It will be on how trees impact the growth of plants around them, given by Christy Rolfe. So I hope everybody can join us for that one, and I thank you everybody for coming today, and I think we learned a lot. Thank you, April.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us, and hope to see you later in the month for the second one. Great. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
It was great. Enjoyed it.